So that's pretty good. Yeah. Welcome to the first meeting of the Severe Mental Illness Task Force. As a reminder, we have new meeting protocols in place for this interim session of 2021. Remote access is allowed to all meetings from the interim session. Members were provided a Zoom link to access the meeting remotely, and the meeting materials were put online earlier this week and made available for downloading. So at this time, we'll have the secretary call the roll. Members, you will need to indicate whether you're present in person or remote from the office. Secretary.
Senator Alvarado.
Here in person.
Senator Berg. Senator Meredith.
Here in person.
Representative Fleming.
Present in the room.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
Present in the room.
Representative Wilner.
Here in the room.
Co-Chair Fergie Kerr.
I'm here in my district.
Thank you. And Co-Chair Bentley.
Here in person. Hi, Co-Chair Kerr. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, and I'm very happy to be with you all today. I had some surgery a few weeks ago and have had a little bit of complications, so I'm very sorry not to be in the room, but plan to be there next month. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you get well soon. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you perfectly well. Thank you. You sound good, too. You've got a good voice for TV or radio.
It's called a radio voice is what they tell me up home. I need to go on the radio. Maybe I can make a Cirrus or something. I don't know. Okay, before we begin with the presentations, for members participating remotely, which is the other co-chair, remember to mute your microphone unless you're asking a question. So this afternoon, we're going to start a presentation on severe mental illness, and we will begin with Dr. Schuster, who will be providing an overview of community-based treatment and relevant legislation. Please identify yourself for the record, and members, hold your questions till after the presentation, please. Thank you. Doctor.
Thank you very much. Am I on? You have to turn it on. There's a button.
Oh, there we go. How's that? Better. Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sheila Schuster, a licensed psychologist and executive director of the Kentucky Mental Health Coalition. The coalition is composed of over 80 organizations representing consumers, family members, providers, and advocates, and we will be celebrating our 40th birthday next year. I'm excited to be here to speak with you all, and I want to thank Co-Chair Bentley for inviting me. The coalition and its members also appreciate the efforts of Representative Kim Moser in sponsoring House concurrent resolutions in the past two legislative sessions to establish this task force. We are particularly grateful to the legislative leadership in both chambers who moved forward to authorize the task force to meet during this interim session. As you know, the task force was established to examine the needs for services and supports for a very small but a very important group of adult Kentuckians who have huge unmet needs. Those Kentuckians whom we consider to have a severe mental illness or SMI. You're probably familiar with the names of the diagnoses that describe these individuals: schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorders, bipolar disorder, PTSD, and major depressive disorders. Historically, we have referred to these diagnoses as psychotic disorders because the individual who has one experiences a break from reality. These diagnoses all describe brain diseases which can significantly affect the individual's ability to differentiate reality from fantasy or hallucinations, to calibrate one's emotions and actions, to make good decisions, to maintain relationships, or to exercise sound judgment. These illnesses typically strike in early adulthood, more frequently in males than in females, and very often affect individuals who are intelligent and motivated, very often who are in college or at the beginning of their careers. Mental illnesses of all types are no respecter of socioeconomic status, religion, political party, race, ethnicity, or geography, and that's true of all mental illnesses. Prior to the 1960s, persons diagnosed with a psychotic disorder were often housed in large, crowded psychiatric hospitals, very often referred to as asylums, even for the duration of their lives following diagnosis. These hospitals also housed individuals who were not mentally ill, but were significantly impaired with profound developmental and intellectual disabilities or with physical disabilities and dementia. You may not know that the original Eastern State Hospital on Newtown Pike in Lexington was the second oldest psychiatric hospital in the entire country, having been in existence since 1817 and still in existence until 2013. In 1945, it housed 1,996 patients. That number was cut by half to 999 in 1967 after federal legislation was passed in 1963, the Community Mental Health Act, to deinstitutionalize individuals with mental illness. The old Eastern State Hospital housed 150 patients in 2007, so you can see the decline that came with deinstitutionalization. Fortunately, a new state-of-the-art Eastern State Hospital was built on the UK Coldstream property and opened in 2013, thanks largely to the unrelenting advocacy of NAMI Lexington, who kept the call for a new hospital alive for many years until it became a reality. For those of you not familiar with NAMI, N-A-M-I, it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we will mention their advocacy work frequently during our presentations because they are really the on-the-ground folks. They are largely the family members and consumers around people with severe mental illness. So what happened in the 1960s when we had huge numbers of people with severe mental illness and other disabilities suddenly turned out of the institutions and into the community? Believe me when I say we are still grappling with that question. We still have not completely dealt with all of the issues that those folks had when they were let out, if you will, or dumped out, or turned out, or released, or whatever word you want to use. They are in our communities, and we have been trying for the last 60 years to cobble together a network of services and supports for these individuals and for their family members, quite frankly, for people that advocate for them. We had the Community Mental Health Act, and at that time, and some of you have heard me say this in previous testimony, Kentucky was #1 in the nation. Think about that. We were the very first state to take that federal legislation and turn it into state legislation, KRS 210, to establish a statewide network of community-based mental health centers. They used to be called mental health, mental retardation boards. Of course, we don't use the term mental retardation anymore, but that was their original title because they not only were authorized under 210 to take care of people with mental illness, but also people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. We've called them, and you all have called them, CMHCs for years and years. And I'm delighted that you have two great representatives from the CMHCs here to talk after I talk, because you really need to get that on-the-ground perspective. So we were #1 in laying out that statewide network. I was not even in Kentucky at that time, but I came in 1970, and I began to realize how important that was. The other thing that I benefited from, I was finishing my doctoral training at the University of Louisville, and I needed to complete a full year's internship to get my doctoral degree. And I was able to put an internship together with what was then River Region, is now 7 counties. And what I've come to understand, and this is important for you all to know, the CMHCs have trained probably thousands of mental health providers of every kind, psychiatry, psychology, social work, counselors, every kind. They've done it through internships and through supervised practica. So many people that you know as providers, whether they're providers in private practice or they stayed in the system, most of them got their training and then left the system, unfortunately. But without the CMHCs, our scarcity of behavioral health providers that Senator Alvarado talks about so often, that faucet would have been down to a drip. I mean, we literally would not have even the number of providers that we have now. So it's a very important role that they have played. The other unfortunate thing is that if you ask me now where Kentucky ranks, we were #1. We're probably 45th or 46th in terms of the funding per capita on mental health. We also are one of the few states in the country that received F scores from NAMI National when they graded our mental health system. So we have really fallen. And it's not out of a lack of effort, both on the part of advocates and providers, but also on the part of legislators. And one of the things I want to do is to highlight some of the actions that the General Assemblies have taken over the years to try to address some of these problems. I will also tell you that I will follow up with you with a written document with those references to the specific statutes so you can go back and look at those and other references. So what's one of the things that we spend most of our time thinking about, worrying about, and this will hit you right in the heart, Representative Bentley, because it's medications. You know, the most progress that has been made in the treatment of people with severe mental illness has been around medications. Those early generation medications had terrific, horrible side effects. It was very, very difficult to get people to take them to start with or to ever stay on them. Electroconvulsive shock therapy, ECT, was done with a sludgel instead of pinpoint accuracy, which is being done now. So we really didn't know a lot about what constituted a severe mental illness, and we weren't very good at treating it. The kinds of advances that have been made in medications have been incredible, and I know that we're going to have a board-certified psychiatric pharmacist present at a later time, and I think that will be great for you all. Remember, though, that these new medications are not without their side effects, and it still keeps people having a hard time staying on them. One of them is weight gain, often leading to diabetes. Another is tardive dyskinesia, which is unwanted motor activities. There's even an ad on television. Have you seen that recently for a new medication I thought nobody talked about tardive dyskinesia except in the mental health clinics, but that's how common those side effects are. And you will hear, if you ever talk to people with serious mental illness or their family members, they will say, I don't feel like it's me. I don't feel like I can be creative. I don't feel like I can function when I'm on my medication. So that adherence, sometimes called compliance, which I hate because it makes it sound like people are willfully making a decision not to be compliant like an errant child, and that really is not the case. So we really need to be looking at medications. One of the wonderful advances has been what we call long-acting injectables. They're very common now for a 30-day period, so instead of the person having to remember to or be willing to take a medication every day for 30 days, they can have one shot. It's been very helpful for our people who tend to be homeless and wandering and may not have a home. The newest ones now are available for a 3-month period and are just now becoming available. So we want to be sure that we understand. So what are the barriers to medication? A lack of psychiatric prescribers. And again, Senator Alvarado has spoken to that eloquently. So we have psychiatrists. We have very limited numbers of child psychiatrists. We have, fortunately, a growing number of psychiatric or mental health nurse practitioners. More programs are developing that. But you will ask the CMHCs here behind me what's their hardest staff to get, and it's psychiatrists. The other thing is the managed care organizations present barriers that we really need to be able to deal with. They institute what we call prior authorizations that make it so difficult and time-consuming for the prescriber that they actually modify the prescriber's behaviors because you've got 15-minute med checks, and if you know that you're going to have to get a prior authorization done and faxed over and so forth, the tendency is to go to a medication that may not be as effective, but one that the person can get without your having to go through a prior authorization. And then we have the adherence issue as well. There have been a number of pieces of legislation to deal with this. Back in the early 2000s, we added a second psychiatrist to the Medicaid P&T committee, they call it, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. We wanted to be sure that we had a community-based psychiatrist who could look at those medications and really determine their efficacy and decide what should be on the approved drug list. We also had a wonderful bill passed in 2020, SB 150, to create a single formulary for Medicaid. We have been advocating for that in the behavioral health community ever since we've had MCOs. Because what do you have? And I know Senator Meredith knows this. Every MCO has a different formulary. Every MCO has a different set of rules. Every MCO has a different way to do prior auths. And of course, the prescriber doesn't always know when the person comes in or can't keep track of what's on their pharmacy formulary, PDL, and so forth. So that went into effect January 1st. And I would not lie to you by saying it's been heavenly because it has not been. We've had our ups and downs with it. But I will tell you that the Medicaid folks, the pharmacy folks, Dr. Joseph before he left and his replacement now, Dr. Ali, have been very helpful in working with us. They're trying to ease everybody into this single formulary. And I think by the end of the year, when we get that worked out, that will be a godsend. At least everybody will know what are those psychiatric medications that are on the preferred drug list and which ones are not, and what are the over-the-counter medications. So that's very important. I also want to point out that we've developed some other treatments besides medication. One that I would call your attention to is called Cognitive Enhancement Therapy, or CET. It's being done beautifully at Bridgehaven Mental Health Services in Louisville, and particularly with newly diagnosed younger patients. And I would suggest that you might have somebody from Bridgehaven come and present to you. That's an evidence-based treatment that's really proving to be very successful. Payment. Prior to 1964, everybody was in the hospital, so the state was paying for all those folks. Once they got out in the community and KRS 210 was established, the community mental health centers could bill Medicaid, and that was a godsend, of course. And Medicaid is much more flexible, as you all know, than private insurance in terms of the range of services that it will cover. So it covers not only the diagnosis and the medications and the therapy, but it also covers what we call targeted case management, which is probably the glue that holds the system together. It's those people that can keep in touch with the person and know what they need for their next kind of service delivery. It also includes people that we've developed called peer support specialists, who are people with the lived experience of having a severe mental illness, have been in recovery, have been trained and certified by the state, and now are billable thanks to the advocacy of the behavioral health community and the legislature, are billable to Medicaid. Some of you may know that we have peer support specialists over on the mental health side. We also have them on the substance use disorder side, which I'm sure Senator Alvarado is familiar with. And again, these are folks that know when a crisis is coming. Very often they can get to the person and get them redirected or get them into services. So those are some of the treatment enhancements that we have. We also have perfected, and I'm sure that either Steve or Mark will talk about assertive community teams, action teams that reach out and particularly are hooked up with our people with severe mental illness to try to make sure that they're taking their medication, they're getting to their therapy appointments, and so forth. In 2011, the payment structure here in Kentucky changed, and I will say, for one, it did not change for the better. That was when the first Beshear administration brought in the managed care organizations. And I don't know if some of you may remember at that time, but the behavioral health community fought hard, really hard, to be carved out, as has happened in other states. We're a tiny portion, I think no more than 3%, probably less than 3% of the total Medicaid spending budget. And yet we feel like our people really need special attention. It's not just a matter of dollars. It's really fine-tuning the treatment and keeping that safety net tight so they don't fall through. And so we really worked hard to not be under managed care, and we were unsuccessful. And I will tell you, as the chair of the Behavioral Health Technical Advisory Committee to the MAC, it has been a battle. I mean, I will not lie to you, and I know Senator Meredith has lobbied for fewer numbers of MCOs and so forth. But the things that we told them when they first came in 2011, people need to have access to their medication when it's prescribed. People need to be able to go to the hospital if that's where they need to go. And consumers and family members need to be a part of your decision-making, need to be on your advisory committees and so forth. And of course, I'm sure you will not be surprised that all three of the original MCOs said, absolutely, absolutely. We will grandfather those. They don't use grandmother, I'm glad to say. They will grandfather in all of those people and keep them on the same medications, and we will have everybody at the table. And that lasted maybe a week, right? I mean, it has been an uphill battle every step of the way. And I'm here to tell you that the present Commissioner Lee, has been wonderful to us in our behavioral health TAC, where we have brought up these issues about why can't we get targeted case management for our people with severe mental illness to keep them out of homelessness, to keep them out of jail, to keep them out of recidivism back to the hospital. And the MCOs turn it down and turn it down and turn it down. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but Medicaid has suspended all prior authorizations for behavioral health. And when I use behavioral health, I'm talking about both mental health and substance use disorders. So we're in a real quiet, protected period right now. In addition to that, she has given us access to the data managers over at Medicaid so that they can pull data to see what actually has been the effect of targeted case management on people with severe mental illness. And we've had several conversations with them. We're trying to narrowly define and make sure that we ask for things that are gettable in the database, but also can show us what the successes have been. And she has been, and her staff have been right there with us every step of that. So I'm very encouraged by that. And I'm hoping that we can move beyond just fighting with the MCOs over every piece of service or supports. You all have also passed bills, Representative Fleming back in 2018 around centralized credentialing and the medical necessity criteria that we're still working on trying to get. We love Senator Meredith, Senate Bill 55, to get rid of the copays in Medicaid. I have actually argued to Medicaid and to the MAC that people with behavioral health ought to get paid for keeping their appointments and taking their medication, and they shouldn't be dinged. Literally, that's what I've recommended. You know, we ought to be reinforcing people for doing what they're supposed to be doing when it's so hard for them to do that. So I'm thrilled, as you know, Senator Meredith, with those Medicaid copays going away. We don't think of $3 as being much, but if you're on 10 and 12 medications and they're each $3, and you don't know when you go into the doctor's office whether there's going to be an additional copay, people are not keeping their appointments because they think, and it's embarrassing. You know, I mean, these people have emotions around those things as well, and they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be asked for $3 and have to say, no, I don't have that. And our community mental health centers and most of our behavioral health providers did not ever turn anybody away, but the individual didn't always know that. And so rather than to run into that, they would just stay away. The other thing that has been a real issue is what we call integrated care. People with serious mental illness die on average 25 years sooner than their peers who do not have a serious mental illness. And that's been shown in a number of resources or researches, and we'll show that to you. 25 years. Now, there's not necessarily a correlation between a brain disease and your body falling apart, but there is a correlation between not being in touch with reality and maybe having what we call anosognosia, which is the inability to even know that you're ill. And that's true of both your physical and your mental health condition. And so people don't get the care that they need. So that's one issue. The other issue is, quite frankly, and not to point fingers, but the medical community, the physical health, let me call it community, because it's not certainly just physicians, but all of what we think of as the physical health community, find it hard to deal with our folks. I mean, I'll tell you, my daughter's a nurse at a family health center in Louisville, and more than once she has called me to say, what should we do with this behavior in our waiting room? You know, we want to serve this person, but they're scaring the other people that are here and so forth, and what should we do? So there's that problem as well. The other thing is that our folks get used to coming, say, to the community mental health center. They know people there that feel safe to them. It's very, very hard to get them to go someplace else and to start that process new again, and to have to say to somebody, yeah, I have schizophrenia, or yes, I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So the CMHCs finally got some legislation passed in 2014 to allow them to have a non-psychiatric physician at the mental health center. So it was under one roof. It was integrated in that sense. They could get both physical health and mental health care. It took several years, unfortunately, because of the MCO contracts to actually put that into place. But there are a number of our CMHCs. Also, at your federally qualified health centers, your FQHCs, they are licensed to be able to do both mental health and physical health. So we used to say there should be no wrong door. Wherever the person shows up, whether they've got both of those needs, they ought to be able to get both of those needs serviced. So we know that probably 1 in 5 Americans will experience some mental health issue in their lifetime, so 18 to 20% of our population. We think that probably the SMI population is somewhere between 2.5% and 4%. But we also know that many of them do not get treatment when they need treatment first, when they're first diagnosed or could be first diagnosed. And many of them get into treatment via law enforcement, quite frankly, because they have acted in a way or come to the attention of. We have involuntary commitment here in Kentucky. It was passed in 1982. You all have heard it referred to as KRS 202A. It's a very strict set of criteria, stricter than in many other states. We're very aware of the issue of when do you go against somebody's will and force them to do something that they really don't want to do? At what point do I, as a psychologist, judge that this person is not capable of making a rational decision about their care, about their needs? And so we've instituted the 202A. Those criteria are that the individual has a mental illness, presents a danger to self or others as a result of the mental illness, can reasonably benefit from treatment, and hospitalization is the least restrictive mode of treatment. So many of your NAMI family members are quite familiar with having to go down to the district courthouse, take out what they call a mental inquest warrant, an MIW, and have the judge rule that the person should be picked up. The sheriff or law enforcement goes out and picks up the person, takes them to the local state psychiatric hospital. Law enforcement hates to do those runs because they have to wait there until some decision is made, and sometimes the person doesn't get seen right away. We've tried to build in some safety in terms of having only qualified mental health professionals. We call them QMHPs, so they're your psychiatry, psychologists, social workers, and so forth. We have some experience with these folks, and they're held for a 72-hour period, at which time then there's a court hearing, and they might be held for a longer period of time. Discharge from the hospital back to the community is an ongoing problem. In the ideal world, the person we would know and have time for the discharge planning to be done. They would be sent out with enough of their medication to sustain them, usually 7 days or 14 days. And we would have what we call a warm handoff to the community. So the community, usually the community mental health center, would be there, pick the person up, make sure that they get, and this is where your peer support specialists are very important to be there on the job. I would love to be able to tell you that it works that way. These guys behind me can tell you chapter and verse about why it doesn't work that way. One of the biggest problems, again, is the lack of prescribers. So if that person needs to get that medication renewed, refilled, if they can't get in to see a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, they're out of luck at that point. And sometimes the person literally falls through the cracks. So we need to have some other mechanism for picking up these people. Back in 2007, there was additional funding put into the community mental health centers with a program called DIVERTS, Direct Intervention Vital Early Responsive Treatment System. It was in the Ernie Fletcher administration. Mark Birdwhistle was the Secretary of the Cabinet, and it was a really neat project. Did not take that many dollars, and the CMHCs then had the wherewithal to really follow up, to be at the front door of the state hospital when the person was released and get them into that warm handoff and so forth. Like so many of our programs, the funding drops, and then the program is lost. We've had other issues. We've had crisis stabilization units that were funded back in 2002, 8-bed units for adults and 8-bed units for children. Unfortunately, the funding was done with every one of the 14 community mental health center regions getting the same number of beds, which doesn't make a lot of sense. If you think about 1 million people in 7 counties and 50,000 in Comprehend up in Maysville, So an additional CSU unit was actually put in Louisville in memory of a gentleman I'll tell you about in a little bit. So you all have heard me talk on and on about the revolving door. So our people with SMI are the best examples of people that get stabilized on medication for whatever reason. They quit taking their medication, or they go to get the next refill and it's not there. They stop taking it. They get into trouble with their behavior, with their lack of ability to understand reality and to make sound decisions. They get under a mental inquest warrant, they get back to the hospital, and you get into that revolving door. Or, even worse, they get into trouble with the law. They get put in jail or prison. And you've seen these statistics. We have more people with mental illness in our jails and prisons than we do in our psychiatric hospitals. And that's true in Kentucky. It's true in every state in the nation. And that's just an abysmal state of affairs. If you talk to your jailers and your sheriffs, they will say they don't belong there. We don't want them there, but we don't know where else to take them. We've had problems in the jails with suicides. Back in 2000, the Courier-Journal ran a series of articles about the number of suicides in the jails. And our Department of Behavioral Health really got into action. They contracted, and it's a program that still is operational with, it used to be Bluegrass Mental Health Centers, now New Vista, where they run a triage line that's available to every jail. You have a qualified mental health professional who can screen those calls, tell them whether they think the person's a suicide risk or not, needs to be put on suicide watch, and then a referral is made to the community mental health center in that area to get in touch with the jail and so forth. So we've patched together, with the help of the legislature over the years, this problem pops up or we have a death. Unfortunately, these things come from bad things happening to good people. And so we say, okay, we got to take care of that. So we run over and we do a program. And sometimes the funding gets sustained and sometimes it doesn't. But the problem doesn't go away. When these people were put out of the hospital into the community, they were not obviously cured or treated even. And so we've really not done a good job of doing a comprehensive, what is it that these folks need and how can we address that? So let me talk a little bit about Tim's Law. You all have heard this over the years. This was a 5-session long battle that we had to get this bill passed. And let me tell you the story of Tim Morton. Tim Morton was a young man in Lexington who had schizophrenia. And he also had what I've referenced before, anosognosia. In other words, he was so ill that he did not recognize either his mental incapacities or his physical problems. And he had significant physical problems. So he lived by himself in Lexington, supported by his parents and his family who kept in touch with him. He died. And so she would go down to the Lexington District Court and take out a mental inquest warrant. The sheriff would come, put him in handcuffs in the back of the car, take him to that second oldest Eastern State Hospital where it was freezing in the winter and burning up in the summer. And it looked like something out of Dracula movies if you ever were on that campus. And he would go there. He would get stabilized. He would say, I'm going to do better. He would come back home. and that revolving door would start again. If you're a mom or a dad, picture doing that 37 times. 37 times. Seeing your son, your flesh and blood, incapable of taking care of himself, carted off in the back of the sheriff's car, and know that that was going to happen again and again. 37 times. So we decided to do something about it. And Tom Birch was chair of the Health and Welfare Committee at the time and did yeoman's work. We met for about 16 months with everybody and their brother and sister, one of those meetings where consumers and family members and protection and advocacy and the public defenders and the lawyers and the comp care centers and everybody trying to come up with something that would address that problem without abrogating the people's rights. And we came up with Tim's Law. We have the strictest criteria of any assisted outpatient treatment program in any of the states because we wanted to cast a narrow net, a small net. We didn't want to scoop up everybody who had ever been diagnosed with a mental illness. So they have to have a diagnosis of a serious mental illness. They have to have been previously involuntarily committed under 202A. We had said twice in the previous 12 months. We changed it last session to twice in 24 months. They have to have been examined by a qualified mental health professional and found to have the anosognosia as well. So the courts would order the person to outpatient treatment. And the reason that this has been effective in 44 other states is what they call the black robe effect. So Tim, instead of just going to the hospital and coming back home and falling apart again, would have to go to the courthouse and report to a judge who had a court worker, an additional layer of people kind of keeping track of him, and would get the report from the ACT team. He didn't let us in again. We think he's not taking his medication. And they would bring him back to court with a stern warning and so forth. You know, you don't want to go back to the hospital. It's much the same way that the drug courts are working in terms of, you know, let's divert you into treatment. So it finally passed in 2017 with Senator Julie Rocky Adams taking it on. It was nearly unanimous. And then Governor Bevin vetoed it. You all may remember that. Somebody had told him that it abrogated every Kentuckian's rights and that they were all going to be taken to the hospital, which of course was not true. And the legislature overrode that veto. And so we celebrated the passage of Tim's Law and had a great celebration, I have to admit, without the governor being invited. Unfortunately, no funding was put in there, and there is cost to this with a court worker assigned to the judges' chambers and so forth. And so there's actually only been, that we know of, one case where Tim's Law has been actually used, Judge Stephanie Burke, and you may want to have Stephanie Burke come and talk with you, Representative Bentley, because she's been on this from the very beginning. Did it in 2019, and it's been hugely successful. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Our Department of Behavioral Health applied for and got a SAMHSA grant. That's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, a multi-year grant, and they are rolling out Tim's Law in the comp care center districts that are served by Western State Hospital, so that's Western Kentucky, and also 7 counties that's served by Central State. So I would think you might want to have somebody from the Department for Behavioral Health come and talk to you about how they've implemented that funding and how they are seeing this, you know, put Tim's Law into effect. We really need more funding to take it statewide. It really is a model that I think would get people, the whole idea of it is to get people stable on their medications long enough that they have kind of an aha moment and begin to see that taking their medication and sticking with treatment actually gets them someplace is a good thing for them. Unfortunately, Tim died before he could have used this. He died of natural causes, but he really died of his mental illness and of his own neglect and in some ways our failure to take care of him. we knew that he was in trouble, and we couldn't figure out how to take care of him. And that is so often the case with our folks with severe mental illness. We know that bad things are going to happen, and we don't have a strong enough safety net to gather these people up. So Tim's Law, I think, is good. Am I just running way over in time? Mental health courts. There are 4 of them right now in Kentucky, up in Boone County, Lexington, Louisville, and E-Town. Unfortunately, there's never been a systematic approach to getting mental health courts there. I think it would be great to have the most recent one was established in Lexington, and that's NAMI Lexington, Kelly and Phil Gunning and those folks. And they started it on a shoestring. They got local funding from Metro Lexington. They got a judge who volunteered his services, and they have made this thing work for the last 3 years. I mean, it would really be, it's a success story, except we shouldn't be doing business that way, kind of tied together with, a wish and a hope. But mental health courts, I think the judges would say, and certainly the family members and advocates would say, are really a good thing because they catch people before they would be sent off to jail or prison and get them diverted into treatment. And that really is a model. It's also a model for a program called CIT, Crisis Intervention Team Training, started in Louisville when a man with serious mental illness was running around in Chickasaw Park naked, I think, and harassing people, and the police came and ended up shooting him 40 some odd times. I mean, it was just a complete and utter disaster. And the president of NAMI Louisville at that time was a gentleman named Jim Daly, and he had heard about the CIT program starting in Memphis, and he went down to Memphis and met with those folks and brought them back to Louisville, and Louisville started the first crisis intervention team training. It has since been in statute since 2007. It's housed at the state training facility, and it includes not only local law enforcement, but also our Kentucky State Police. And then in this past session, Representative Banta had a bill, House Bill 44, that extended it to firefighters. So this is diversion. Don't take them to jail. Take them to a treatment facility. Take them to a front door into the mental health system. Really important. The other problem that we have is that we do have people that commit serious crimes who have a mental illness. And right now, Kentucky still holds those people with the possibility of the death penalty. Now, Kentucky and the Supreme Court has acted to preclude other populations of people from the death penalty. One are people with intellectual developmental disabilities who don't have the cognitive ability to understand what they've done. The other are youth. And House Bill 148 in the past session passed the House and passed a Senate Judiciary Committee, but wasn't called for a final vote. I think we owe it to these people who do not have the mental capacity to understand their actions at the time that they are in a psychotic state to save them from the death penalty. I will tell you that family members worry about that because they have seen their folks be off their medication and get angry, and they worry that they're going to do something to harm somebody, but they're also worried that they could be put to death. The other thing that you want to really look at is housing. Think about this. People were housed in these huge state hospitals, and we opened the doors and put them out in the community. We didn't do anything about housing. I mean, we really didn't have a plan for housing them. And unfortunately, Medicaid does not provide housing, does not have a residential option. So housing is so important, and it's not just having a roof over your head. It's having housing with a little bit of support, somebody who's going to check on you, who's going to make sure that, things are going okay. I would suggest you have somebody like Wellspring in Louisville that does terrific supported housing come and talk with you. Many of our folks end up homeless, And so you have the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. There's also a homeless coalition in both Lexington and Louisville that could talk about some of the things that they've tried to do. Again, getting housing and getting supported housing. The other thing is that our consumers have made great strides. They get this training to be peer support specialists. Many of them would like to work, but they need a supported employment kind of situation. They need to not only learn the job, but to learn how to know when they're in trouble and need the support to stay employed. So here's the solution. I'm giving it to you right now. Get a Medicaid waiver for people with severe mental illness. A Medicaid waiver would provide supported employment and supported housing, two services that Medicaid does not provide. In 2020, you all very wisely put into the budget language a requirement for Medicaid to submit an 1115 waiver to get services for persons with substance use disorders who are in jail and prison. So as of the time that that's going to be happening, which is this year, every population I can think of that's disabled, that has a disability, has some kind of waiver specifically targeting them. Acquired brain injury, physical disabilities, intellectual developmental disabilities, now substance use disorders. Who's left out here, folks? People with severe mental illness. And you can fix that. I think that's it. I know I talked too long, but I'll just tell you. These vulnerable Kentuckians have been overlooked, underfunded, and largely left to be supported by weary family members, too few mental health providers, and a small but determined group of advocates. I urge you to be open to input from those consumers, individuals living with severe mental illness, from their family members, and from providers. Hopefully, a purposeful, meaningful reform and system. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be all-inclusive. And I will quit talking and answer any questions that you might have. I appreciate your indulgence.
With them.
I cry more easily than I used to, but you tell these stories enough times and it just gets to you. You know how long I've been doing this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to take questions from the people here in the room first. Dr. Wilner raised her hand, and Ken, anybody else? We'll put you on the list. 1, 2, Dr. And Co-Chair Kerr, do you have a question? Since you're only one, I'll ask you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question, and I thank you. Dr. Schuster, appreciate so much your time and expertise and your perseverance. My goodness, all these years that you have worked on these issues, and it makes me so sad to hear that we've gone from number 1 or 2 to number 45 or 46, and that we go from good grades to having an F. And when it's only such a small subset of our population that has severe mental illness, that we should do better. We should do better. Tell me about, is it a vicious cycle as to why we can't get psychiatrists? Is this something that's going on nationwide? Is it because of the disparity between mental health insurance and physical health insurance, and so nobody's going into psychiatry anymore? Or where are these people to help?
I'm not sure, and Senator Alvarado may be in a better position to talk about the numbers. I do know that psychiatry of all the specialties is probably less well paid than some of the specialties. I think what's happening, at least for the comp care centers, Senator Kerr, is that if they get a psychiatrist that they can talk to, quite frankly, they often cannot afford to hire them because they can really name their price. And I don't know, I know that Representative Moser's son is going into psychiatry, so we've all cheered that. But I was trying to get him into child psychiatry, actually. But
right.
I don't know. Maybe Senator Alvarado has some responses to that, because he certainly has talked eloquently about that.
And Dr. Schuster, before perhaps Dr. Alvarado, what is, I mean, can these doctors be helped? I mean, is it not being promoted in our medical schools? And is this, Dr. Alvarado, a national problem or more of a statewide situation?
My guess is it's national. The other problem that you have, Senator Kerr, and I'll just say this, we have lots of rural areas in Kentucky, and we have trouble getting, I know for a fact that you have very few doctoral level psychologists in the rural areas, for instance, and we're not prescribers, but we do supervise a number of other mental health providers and services, and the number of PhD level psychologists in the rural areas. So some of this is a rural urban kind of issue as well.
Dr. Alvarado?
Yes, Senator Kerr. So I can, this is part of my comment too. I think there's a total right now, I looked up these statistics. I was on an NCSL call yesterday regarding this issue. About 30,000 total psychiatrists in the country, about 15 million people with severe mental illness. And we're talking people with schizophrenia, severe mental illness.
Right.
As a primary care doctor, I've gotten used to handling mild to moderate psychiatric illnesses because you have to. There's just no psychiatrist available. So often, if you refer somebody for a psychiatric evaluation, you have to wait sometimes months for that person to be seen. We have pathways programs and different kinds of programs locally. Those psychiatrists come in our community. They set up shop. They'll see people for a couple of years, are overwhelmed and burn out and leave is what we often will see. So you'll get somebody, if you have a new psychiatrist opens up shop, they'll be full in 6 months guaranteed, and they'll be done taking new patients on. So you can fill them up as quickly as you can get them in. And it's a struggle for a lot of primary care docs. The one thing I wanted to mention to this committee, just on this topic, since we're on it now, I have a good colleague and friend I've known since college days, who's now a professor at the University of California, Irvine, Robert McCarran, who's a guy that went to Rush Medical School in Chicago. He's double boarded in internal medicine and in psychiatry. And he's a program director for a psychiatric program for residents over at UC Irvine. They've established a program at UC Irvine to try to train rural health providers to handle severe mental illness issues. And the General Assembly in California has allocated funds for that purpose to help that person reach out through Zoom calls, and earn a certificate, if you will, for a lot of those primary care doctors to handle that. What keeps a lot of primary care docs from managing people with severe mental illness is just really liability fears. The biggest risk with anybody with psychiatric illness is going to be suicide. So if someone does that, it puts those crosshairs directly on you from a liability angle. We know that in this state, we have a major liability problem. I've been advocating for that since I've been in. It's part of the reason why I ran for office. And it's a continued issue. And until we do something on our Constitution, it's not going to be resolved. But part of it is just liability. It's a fear of a primary care doctor saying, hey, if you've got depression, anxiety, even bipolar and some issues, I'm willing to manage that. You've got schizophrenia, you've got schizoaffective personality disorders, things that are much more difficult to handle. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to handle it. I don't want to give people antipsychotics. And you're trying to find a specialist, and often you can't find them. So we've got a major shortage of 30,000 people in this state. I've talked about child psychiatry. We train child psychiatrists at the University of Kentucky. We have 2 slots per year. And those people that go into a 5-year program, they train in pediatrics, general psychiatry, and pediatric psychiatry, all 3. It's a 5-year program, 2 slots per year. And those folks, like you said, Dr. Schuster, name their price. They go wherever they can go. They get so they get reimbursed well because there's such a major demand, and we just don't have enough slots for those residents to be trained. So it's difficult. I think in our state, the last time I checked, and that's probably old data, probably 4 or 5 years old, we had 59 child psychiatrists in the state of Kentucky. Half of those are cash only. And so I've got colleagues that I train with at UK who I go to see them and say, why don't you take insurance? It's a hassle. I don't want to deal with the insurance headaches. I don't want to deal with paperwork. I'm my own employee, the only employee. They do their own scheduling. They take cash per hour, and they're up to their ears in work, and people willing to pay cash to be seen don't want to deal with any of the insurance headaches. So it's a major problem. So about half of those psychiatrists will see Medicaid. So you can imagine 25, 30 child psychiatrists for 1 million children in the state of Kentucky. You look at the numbers, it's almost third world country deficiencies that we have. So there's lots of factors for trying to get people to get into the world of psychiatry. And one thing we may want to consider, and if it's okay with the chairman and the chairwoman, is to consider Dr. McCarran, who might be willing to do a Zoom call. I can probably put us in touch to have him present on what they're doing in California to see if it's an option for us. And I know there's been a bit of issue with the Attorney General in that state boycotting our state in the past. So I'm not sure if they're willing to do business with us, but it might be something worth presenting at least to get information and see if that's something that we could do here. To look and try and at least get our primary care docs who sometimes just don't have the skills or are frightened to have those skills because they're scared of the liability that goes along with it, but be able to provide some of that care for people in those areas. And Dr. Schuster, I just wanted, as long as I'm got the microphone, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, a lot of our qualified mental health professionals, I do a lot of Casey's Law evaluations, I haven't done so many as far as Tim's Law issues. In long-term care, we're encountering more and more people with mental illness. Some of it's homelessness, people that are treated in a hospital, homeless, they get treated, they come to us for rehab, and then their fear is, where are you going to say, I have nowhere to go? Because I look at them, they look pretty functional, and I say, why are you in a nursing home or in a skilled nursing setting? I'm homeless, I have nowhere else to go, and it's a struggle trying to find, kind of a home situation for them. People with substance use, we call it transitional housing. There's different terms that we're using for that. We've got to find some kind of a solution for that. And really, again, the MD training, and we had long-term care beds at Eastern State in the past. I know we've shut a lot of those down. We've got to look at finding ways to reopen some of that up. It's just really an access issue for a lot of it. But and again, we have these task forces a lot of times to look for solutions and ideas. And so we've identified a lot of problems. I think most of us serve on health and welfare. We know those problems. We need actionable solutions or recommendations from you all. So if you can do anything in writing to help us as a task force at the end of this entire session, we want to have something we can act on and some things we can propose. So anything you could provide would be really, really helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Next in line is Representative Wilner, Dr. Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Schuster, that was just a fabulous overview, a heartbreaking overview. But I feel like you really gave this task force a blueprint for the issues that we'll be looking at over the course of the interim. And I'm the houselessness issue, and Dr. Alvarado brought that up as well. It's so profound. I heard a statistic. I've been talking a lot with folks who serve houseless people. My district is that's such a huge issue right now, and with the unemployment crisis, it's a growing issue. And you mentioned that 2 to 4% of the population has what we severe mental illness, and I heard a statistic yesterday that in Jefferson County, among the houseless folks, that population of SMI people is more like 50 to 60%. And so I'm curious if you know, and I see, Steve, I see you nodding, and if we have hard data on that and how critical that supported housing is. And people don't necessarily need to be in institutions, but they need a roof and they need the supports and they need access to meds and social services and, all of that.
That does not surprise me. I'm sure that Adrian Bush at the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, Natalie Harris at the Louisville Homeless Coalition. I'm sure Wellspring, who does the supported housing, would have those statistics. I'm guessing that number also includes people with substance use disorders as well. I mean, there's co-occurring issues, obviously, with mental health and substance use disorders, and sometimes we're not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, whether people have the symptoms of anxiety, depression, and so forth, and self-medicate with drugs or alcohol or whatever, or vice versa. But my guess is it includes, and maybe not, maybe the stat that they're saying is they're looking primarily at people with severe mental illness.
That was my understanding, that it was the severe mental illness. And, if we look at mental health issues generally, I mean, if you're homeless, you probably are struggling with anxiety and depression.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But that would not surprise me. Yeah. But I think we can get some numbers to the task force. And again, if that helps to make the case for something like a Medicaid waiver to get us going down that road of supported housing, we certainly will gather that information. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 3 more questions. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Dr. Schuster. I appreciate your very good explanation of everything. And I'd want to ask you, you went over a lot of information, and probably being the least experienced person on this task force from a medical standpoint. Can you make your comments available?
Yes, absolutely.
I would appreciate that, because I'd like to go over the numbers and figure out what's going on. And I understand that the number of people in this particular segment of society is small, but there is also a cost associated with that. And my primary focus is to try to move the needle more. I think the General Assembly has done a decent job this past session in terms of moving the needle, but that needle was probably went up one little tick given the past years of efforts. And two areas I think you went over and talked about is policy and funding. And so I'd like to think that over the next several months we can come up with a priority list that we can try to really move the needle at least 5 to 6 ticks on the meter.
Would be great.
To get that going, but it's going to take a lot of political will to get that going, given it's a small segment, but it's an important segment in that, because as you articulated, there are families that really had a difficult time, particularly the Timms Law and the family that went through that process. So I got a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be ask these quickly and hopefully get a quick response. As the Senator Alvarado mentioned, if we can go through and prioritize exactly what the biggest hits that we can do in moving that needle, that would be greatly appreciated. But data is going to be important, and if we can have the data that will substantiate funding and policy, it makes it easier for this task force to go through and convince our colleagues to go through that process. So that's one thing. The other thing is you mentioned about the psychiatrists, and I've run a very, very small mental health center. We're a nonprofit, and we have our psychiatrist is retiring, and we're in a pickle in terms of who do we refer to when it comes to med management. And if Dr. Wilner has some suggestions, I would appreciate it. But there's two things, I guess, pertaining to that. One, what's the barriers? And I think I know what the answer is. What's the barriers to try to get better reimbursements for these professionals in order to attract more individuals into the field, not only from an MD point of view, but also from an NP point of view in doing that, because we try to go through the process to have somebody come on board. It was going great, but the logistics was difficult, and they're coming to Owensboro, and we're just out in left field. So what's the number of psychiatric NPs, and what's the possibility of tapping into that? Two, what's the barriers that we can try to move the MCOs to be a little more receptive and open to change these dynamics so we can make it easier?
I don't have the number of psychiatric mental health NPs right at my fingertips. I will make my comments available along with a resource list, a reference list of stats and links to the legislation itself and those kinds of things. And I promise you we'll have that before your next task force meeting. How's that? I think that, so many of these folks are taken care of on Medicaid, so we really need to focus on the reimbursement under Medicaid. And NPs are paid 75% of what physicians are paid for the same service. So you have a step down to start with for the NPs. And my guess is, as Senator Alvarado pointed out, and I was going to say this earlier, most of the psychiatrists I know do what I call a boutique practice. They literally do cash only. I mean, they do not take insurance of any kind, much less Medicaid, which is the lowest paying of any of them. So to get that up, I mean, I'd love to see a differential somehow for psychiatry, because it's, we have so few numbers and we have such a great need in that area, and whether there's something that Medicaid could do, to bump up the reimbursement for psychiatrists. Again, every mental health outfit that I know is having the same problem that you're having. Many of them are turning to the psychiatric nurse practitioners, but again, that reimbursement is really an issue. But I will get you the other data things, and I appreciate that request. People know that I like to follow up what I say with the numbers and so forth. To be real honest, and I told Representative Wilner this has been the most difficult testimony for me to get together in all the years, and I've been testifying since 1978. There were so many pieces that I wanted to tell you about. I wanted you all to drink from the fire hose at the same time. And some of you are at very different places than others in terms of knowing this population and so forth. I was trying to get the most important things there, and I talked way over my time. But my notes are a little bit more organized than maybe my presentation was, but I will get it to you.
I appreciate that. And you're right. There's a lot of different facets and it's drinking out of a fire hose. We understand that, but it is also important that we narrow this focus down because we as legislators, we have narrow bandwidths given that we have so much going on.
Well, and so you have lots of other demands from lots of other corners.
It is true, but I tell when I was coaching lacrosse, I told my girls, it's like, the longest distance you can travel is mere 18 inches. And they sit there and raise their eyebrows and cock their heads. What do you mean? So it's a distance between your head and your heart, and you're trying to combine those two in doing that. And so if we can combine the mental aspect of people's lives, which has a significant impact on how we conduct ourselves and how we live our lives and so forth, and not only help provide support and funding for the individual who suffers that, but I think it's more important from a holistic point of view is to address families in its totality. Because those are the folks that are impacted probably just as much, not only the individual. So that's where I'm trying to go in terms of the head and the heart to try to combine those two.
Right.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Dr. Schuster, for what was even to me an overwhelming so much data.
Mr. Chair, I can't hear whoever's speaking. If they could turn their mic on, please.
I'm sorry, Senator. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, I want to say thank you very much. Second of all, I just want to make sure people on the committee understand that from a mental health care perspective, that problems with access to care are not only limited to people without resources. I mean, at this point, we have a tremendous problem with access to good quality mental health care, even for people who are fully insured. I personally had an experience with a child discharged from a hospital with 2 weeks of medication, with instructions, a phone number to reach out to a psychiatrist for a refill. The psychiatrist not only couldn't see him for 4 months, but was completely self-pay. I have yet to find a good psychiatric healthcare provider where my child goes to school that is anything other than self-pay. It is completely out of network. They're too busy. They're too overwhelmed to even think about filing insurance for their patients. Then when you do file on your own, you meet barrier after barrier after barrier. I personally spent 3 hours yesterday and 3 hours again today with healthcare companies, insurance companies, trying to get reimbursed for mental health care that I've paid for out of pocket. It is, and I'm privileged. I have computers. I have phones. It is impossible. The system is broken from beginning to end, and it is impacting the people with the least resources the worst, but it is impacting everybody in this state and everybody in this country. And the real barrier is that mental health care is treated and reimbursed differently than any other type of health care. And you just can't get them to cover it. You can't get them to cover it for a reasonable amount. You can't get them to pay for services. And if I was a psychiatrist and could charge $200, $250 out of pocket and work 10, 12 days a week and not have to bother with an insurance company, I wouldn't at this point either. It is overwhelming and it is undoable. Now, I do have a couple of questions. Just from a cost effectiveness point of view, I'm wondering if we could figure out what percentage of our homeless population here in Kentucky actually has severe mental illness, and what percentage of our incarcerated patients here, or incarcerated people, actually have severe mental illness. Because I'm not wondering if we couldn't find a good treatment program and process for these people, if as a state, honestly, we might not be able to save ourselves money over the long run by actually treating these people effectively, having good housing, good health care providers, access to medication, and not having to pay for them to be incarcerated and what that costs, or not having to deal with the other healthcare issues and the societal issues that come with these patients being homeless or houseless. So those are some
I know
questions.
there's research results from the cost of providing a year's care to someone with severe mental illness as opposed to the cost of incarcerating them. So we can get you that information.
I would
it's
be
significant.
interested.
As you can imagine, it is a significant savings.
Again, thank you. I mean, honestly, I have so many questions. I could sit here and talk for hours, but thank you for an amazing presentation. And Representative Fleming, do not feel like you were overwhelmed because you don't have the background. I have the background. Still overwhelmed.
And aren't you get paid for that too, to do paper pushing? That's what you went to school for.
Representative Prunty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Schuster. I took copious notes, so I'll look forward to see if my notes match what you said. But you said a lot of good things that have happened. You said some things that weren't so good. If you could summarize, I mean, not necessarily right now verbally, but maybe a bullet point list of what we put into effect or what has been put in effect that works, that we need to continue doing.
That's a great idea.
And a list of things that you think need to be changed to target that. I heard echo what I'm hearing in my district from my jailer, from someone who's trying to provide a behavioral mental health clinic. She's putting it together, issues that she's having, from family members who the mental health can't communicate with the jail or the family. I mean, so we may hear from some of those folks later, hopefully. A couple of quick questions, hopefully. You talked about the single formulary. Are all the medications going to be on there that are needed? And then the second question is, it just seems like we always go from one extreme to the other. We deinstitutionalize, and then you have the homeless. Where's the happy medium? Do you have any suggestions for happy medium? Like, I like your idea about the 1115 waiver for housing. Could there be some sort of assisted living that Medicaid will reimburse for mental health, where they could be monitored for meds and things like that? I don't know. I'm just brainstorming out loud. But anyway, if you could answer those two questions. I think
it's a great idea. Yes, the single formulary will have all of the medications that are needed, and the beauty of it, if we can get there, is that it will be the same for everybody who's on Medicaid, whereas now it's every MCO has a different list and so forth. And again, the Medicaid pharmacy department and the Medicaid commissioners and deputy commissioners have been very responsive to us. We have a very active behavioral health TAC, and they are there. And we have our psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners and the providers there saying, we're still having this problem, you need to fix this, and they really get on it. So yes, that's great. I think that the Medicaid waiver could be written to include a residential option that's not supported housing, as we think of somebody being in an apartment with somebody checking in with them, but could actually be a residence, a 3-person residence, for instance, with a house mom or a house dad or something like that. I mean, there are variations that you can do, and there's a fair amount of flexibility paying for it. Obviously we've got a great, what we call FMAP here. So we put up 30 cents and we get $1 worth of services, but we still have to find those 30 cents for those programs. I think that we're spending it on the incarceration side. I think we're spending it in the hospitalization side. I mean, I think those are where you do the cost savings. But yes, we would look at that. So, I think that happy medium is we want people out in the community. However, when they need to be in the hospital, they need to stay long enough to really get stabilized. And I will tell you, and you will hear from families, they barely turn around and they're back out in 72 hours and they're on a new medication, you can't tell in 72 hours with these folks whether that medication is working or not. So there's something going on in terms of, are the hospitals being advised not to keep people longer than 72 hours? I don't know, but I think it's a real issue. I think we ought to look at it, because if you're going to have them in, let's keep them in long enough to make sure that they're absolutely stabilized and you have time to do a discharge plan and to alert the family. I think you all heard from my friend Marcia Van Hook about the sad case of her brother who, died. They barely got him into Eastern State Hospital, and the next thing they knew, they were letting him out. And that family was ill-equipped to deal with that. So I think you're going to hear that from family members. Yeah.
Senator Meredith, we're batting 1,000. Everybody's going to speak. I love it.
Thank you, sir. I don't like to be left out. I appreciate that. And I certainly appreciate.
I was just waiting for you.
Appreciate Dr. Schuster's presentations always. They're very insightful. And I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit too pragmatic for my own good. Much of this boils down to funding for the services. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But we lose sight of the fact that this is the richest country in the world. And we spend 2-3 times more than other industrialized nations on medicine. The money's there. We know it's there. And the comments I would have, I just want to caution the committee that when we look at funding, what we're really talking about is a reallocation of resources. And you've already touched on that. I see this so much in state government. I remember we had a conversation 2 years ago, Co-Chair Bentley, about the guardianship program. And they said we need 200 more social workers. If we do that, we can save millions of dollars. But when I pushed those folks to tell me, well, where those savings come from, no one could identify those savings. And that's part of the problem with our healthcare delivery system. There's absolutely no accountability for the dollars. We have to recognize that we're trying to accomplish two things. One is enhance the quality of life for everyone that we serve, but also reduce the cost of society for these issues. It's real cost, but we don't identify those costs. So I don't think we need really to raise insurance premiums or raise taxes. We need to reallocate those resources. But with that, we have to have a good baseline of where are we spending these dollars. Right. You've already mentioned incarceration. How much does that cost us? I think if we had a number on that, it would be staggering. So the obvious answer is, why aren't we reallocating those resources over to this issue? Well, part of it is folks don't want to give up the resources they have, and we're not making that connection. So we really have to look at this from a global perspective, but we really, I think, have to commit that we're looking at accountability for the dollars we spend, but also a redistribution of those resources. The money's there. We know it's there, but we have to be bold, we being the legislature. If we see, just for discussion purposes, that it's costing us $1 billion to incarcerate these people, then we have to work with the Department of Corrections and say, sorry, folks, but in the future, you're not getting this $1 billion because we're going to spend it over here.
Right.
Of course, there's a transition, but it's a leap of faith. But it starts with having a vision and a plan for the future of how we need to do this. And you've touched on this as well. We don't have a comprehensive plan for this, and we need a comprehensive plan. And once we have that and we put those metrics in place, I think this becomes a whole lot easier. And I know this is being very simplistic about it, but we can do this, but we have to make a commitment that we're going to spend the resources where they best get a return on investment.
Right. And where they lead people to be able to live the lives that they deserve to live. And it's not in a jail or prison.
Well, such as the co-pays that you talked about earlier. One of the ridiculous concepts I ever thought of in my life is you're going to charge people who need health care to access health care so they don't access health care, so it's going to cost you more anyway. So it's that kind of thinking.
Especially the people that don't want to access the health care. That's why I thought we really ought to pay them to access those services.
In fact, Dr. Alvarado had a conversation with one of the MCOs earlier today that talking about the COVID vaccine. Pay them $100 a piece. I guarantee you're going to come out ahead when you do that. But there's innovative ways to do this. There's different ways to do this, but we can do it. But we have to make a commitment that it starts with the redistribution and a master plan of how to do it. But thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, Mark. Now, we're supposed to get out here at 4:30, but we're going to stay as long as we want to.
No pressure.
Now, if you all have to leave, go ahead and leave.
No, we're going to stay as long as you stay.
Well, so if we, you guys take 15 minutes for sure each be okay with me. Yeah.
Well, mine's pretty quick. Is this working? Now it is. Well, my name is Mark Kelly. I'm an LCSW, and I've worked for community mental health for 30 years. I've held every job position that there is to be had in community mental health. And I love the job, enjoy the population, and you really have to enjoy the population that you work with to spend 30 years with them. So, but I'm going to talk primarily about barriers to care in the rural areas, and our coverage area. Generally, it's a 10-county area. It starts in Boyd County and ends in Montgomery County. But one of the barriers in the rural areas that we have is there's, again, chronic shortages of mental health professionals. And it's so bad for Pathways, my agency. We are providing a $10,000 incentive sign-on bonus to just get people to come to our region to work. Also, we have been doing job fairs every week for a month for psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, LCSWs, counselors, anyone with a billable licensure to come and work for us, because we have terrible work shortage. Nobody wants to work in mental health. It's a tough job. And the pay is not great, especially in community mental health, as you can imagine. So the other barrier is acceptability, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, and all of that leads into stigma. The biggest barrier in the rural areas is stigma. And all of these are going to dovetail together, but you live in a small area. Everybody knows your business. Nobody wants to come to Community Mental Health Center. I had helped organize a NAMI group in Moorhead, Kentucky. Got a lot of commitment from the community. But the question that was asked over and over was there a back way in? Could they come in the back way? And we're supposed to be the stigma fighters, but they were too embarrassed to come in at Pathways where we were having the meeting, which boggles the mind. And we have so many families that are suffering with that have loved ones who are going to the hospital over and over. And in the rural areas, it seems like that the resources are stretched so thin. You go to West Liberty, let's say, in Morgan County, and there's just not the resources there. One county over in Moorhead. Then there's not the resources in Moorhead, a couple of counties over in Montgomery County, because Montgomery County is almost like Lexington, But the further east you go, the more difficult it is. Now, when we do an involuntary hospitalization, we try not to do those because it's taking someone's civil rights. We don't take that lightly. We don't want to do it, but sometimes you have to. And when we do that, that involves so many systems besides the community mental health system. It involves the county attorney who's got to get the petition, and involves a petitioner. It involves usually an emergency room. It involves the sheriff's department, and it involves the QMHP from the Community Mental Health Center. Like, those are 5 different systems that have to come together for one client. And I'm sorry to say, over the last 4 days, we've done 3 involuntary commitments a night. And that involves all of our after-hour staff, because community mental health centers in the rural areas run.
I'm just going to share your screen so that
we run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's one of the reasons why there's high burnout. That's one of the reasons why that we don't have a lot of people that want to take those jobs. And with the rural area, you know, if you're the on-call QMHP and you have an involuntary hospitalization evaluation in Morgan County, Kentucky, and you're located in Moorhead, that means that you're going to drive at night to that site, do that evaluation, and come back. Now, COVID has allowed us to utilize Zoom and telemed, which has been a godsend for all of our services. So in rural health, telehealth has revolutionized how we provide our services. Now, I'm still a practicing clinician. I did an individual with a lady who is SMI. She has been able to work, but she can't take off work. And I was able to do the session with her over her cell phone while she sat in the parking lot of where she works. And I've been at this a long time. I can remember where that would have been impossible. That would have been impossible. So COVID did help the rural areas in the fact that we are able to utilize telemedicine to an extent to where we used to have a lot of people that did not keep appointments. But now that we have telemed, we've seen those rates drop and people keep their appointments regularly. We haven't seen that before. So that's totally new. We're very excited about that, and we want to preserve the telemed component that we have going at this time. Also, with rural areas, that means that there's not enough bandwidth. Not everyone has enough Wi-Fi. We have a lot of people that go to McDonald's to get the Wi-Fi. Some people come in if they're able to come in, but, and I'll just skip down here to transportation. There's no transportation. We have people that live so far out in the county that they can't get into us, even if they wanted to. And there are some transportation systems that are there, but they require a 3-day notification beforehand. Now, if someone is having a crisis and wants to see a therapist and needs to get in, and they don't have enough bandwidth to conduct any telehealth, we have to dispatch one of our targeted case managers to go get that person and bring them back. So, it's kind of a case-by-case basis, but it happens over and over and over with clients that we serve. And on the handout, one of the health disparity key findings from the Appalachian Regional Health Commission, it talks about the usual suspects there for Eastern Kentucky, and that is heart disease, cancer, COPD, injury, stroke, diabetes, and suicide. And all of them are higher than the national average. And we've got to be able to do better. I know that Dr. Schuster had talked about targeted case management. And targeted case management really is the hub of all of our treatment for SMI individuals. And I have to say, we're required, our contract with the state of Kentucky says that we're going to provide targeted case management services to every single person that is discharged from the state hospital. Now, I'm the keeper of that contract, and I keep all of our admissions and discharges, and there are quite a few. And we get into issues with managed care who doesn't understand that concept that we're required by law to provide that service. So managed care at times doesn't see the seriousness of that for us as a community mental health center. And so they're like, we don't think it's needed. We don't think it's indicated. Well, they're discharged from a state hospital. They need everything we've got. They're at risk for being homeless. They're at risk for getting psychotic again. And psychosis is a brain emergency. So we are always at it with managed care, with targeted case management. A service that for years the Department of Mental Health has told us and drilled in our heads is the hub of services for SMI, because they're the link that links them to everything else. So targeted case management has been on the ropes. We also have assertive community treatment, which is a team approach to case management. And with Pathways, we have that service primarily in Boyd and Greenup counties. And, it's a team of individuals that work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, with a group of individuals, usually about 10. And the goal is to help them live independently and take their medications accordingly, and to assist them basically eliminating any barriers that they have to living on their own. Now, we have one lady who has accepted assertive community treatment, and she has gone to Eastern State over the last 3 years 31 times. She has no family, and she has several complex physical health issues. And that team is very, very busy with just that one case to help her stay on her medicine, stay on her heart medication, stay on her psychiatric medications. So it's a daunting task, and it takes all of us to do that. And before I take any questions, I just want to say we're seeing a wave of providers they've stopped accepting Medicaid. Pathways of Moorhead, we have a dentist office that's next to our mental health office. We had got our SMI group to understand the importance of oral health. So when the Medicaid regs opened, the dentist gladly took Medicaid. So we were referring all these people. All they had to do was just walk across the parking lot. It was great. But he called me last week and said, we're not going to take Medicaid anymore. So that's going to stop that treatment for those folks that's accessible, that's in walking distance for them. And I asked him why. He said the administrative burden's too great. It takes too much staff to get pre-authorizations, to keep calling, to, he said, we may get approval for a cleaning, and then we do the cleaning, we do an assessment, and then it may lead to a root canal. And then we can't get anybody to do a pre-auth for they won't give us approval. So it's an ongoing issue to advocate for our SMI folks because they can't do it themselves. So, but I wanted to bring that up as well. So if there's any questions.
Senator Berg.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for being here and for caring and for working in this field and for everything.
Thank you.
Everything that you do. And I just have one question. And I'm sure this data is not readily available, but if we could find it, I guess my real question is, does targeted case management work? And if it does, can we show its cost effectiveness in regards to, a decrease in the number of rehospitalizations, a decrease in the number of arrests, a decrease in the incidence of violence, or a decrease in the incidence of homelessness? Is there a way to show that in this subset of patients that are being managed, that we have better outcomes and less costly outcomes, because that's data we can take back to the MCOs and say it's worth paying for it because it's going to cost you less in the long run.
Well, we're working on that. Yes, we are. We are working on that very thing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Targeted Case Management Task Force.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Because that really that's what's going to impact eventually the decision-making process. Does it work? And by working, does it keep people safer, and does it cost us less money? Those are the real questions.
Right. And having worked as a case manager and trained and certified case managers all over the state, I believe it's a vital service that is very underrated, and people don't seem to understand it very well. And I mean, I understand just because we're required to provide it doesn't mean that makes it terrific. But, you know, it is a very good service for our folks. And also, I wanted to mention, you know, our after hours when we go out and we do different evaluations, we go to the jail more to do evaluations than we do the emergency room. I mean, it's, I look at our crisis numbers every morning to see where we went the night before, and we're always at one of the regional jails, always. And we're always having to talk to a judge about temporarily suspending charges so that they can get a hospitalization. And it's, you know, it takes a lot of advocacy at 2 a.m. to get that achieved. So,
and at the same time, if I could, I really would like to reiterate, not just to the people in the community, but to all around the committee, all of us, you know, the problem of dual diagnoses.
yes.
That so
Yes.
many of these patients, because their underlying mental health care problems are not being treated, also become a part of the problem of the addiction in our society. And that you can try to treat one, you can try to treat the other, but if you don't actually address both issues simultaneously, you will not succeed in what you're trying to do.
Well, the uptick at the jails is because we have a group of clients that are between ages 18 to 25, primarily male, that utilize meth, become psychotic, look schizophrenic, and we get called in and evaluate them, and they look very much schizophrenic. Regardless of how they got there, we have to go with what's in front of us. And so we end up doing involuntary commitment because these guys, their brains are so disrupted that they really can't consent to care. So we end up sending them to Eastern State, and then you think, you know, families will call me and say, well, when that meth wears off, he's going to be okay, right? No, not necessarily. Like, they can sustain brain damage. And it's what we see is I've had some of that age group, those guys go to Eastern State, and they're there for 30 days because they can't get their psychosis under control. And then they come to us as a newly SMI individual when there wasn't a history there before. But after the meth use, there's a history now. So that's why we're going to the jail so much, and that's why we're doing so many involuntaries straight out of the jail. And boy, the judges get worn out with us calling and saying they're really, really sick, Judge. Like, they look like they're schizophrenic. Well, they tested positive for meth. I know. But they've got, you know, brain problems. Like, they're really psychotic and out of control. So we end up, you know, doing due diligence and send them appropriately. But that's a whole new phenomenon for us is these newly SMI males that have utilized meth to the point of where they've induced a psychiatric disorder.
Steve, can you come next time?
Yeah, I can talk for 3 minutes.
Well, I know, but I want to hear you talk for 30 minutes.
I can do that. There's something I think we need to be added to this conversation right now.
Yeah. Well, I got two more questions.
Okay.
And Senator Alvarado and then Representative Fleming, and then we'll take your.
Yeah, I can come back.
How about I want you to come back some, because I know you got a lot to say.
You still got questions for
Go
me?
ahead. Go ahead, Senator.
Okay, thank you. So, as you're talking about telemedicine, which is obviously something we've been working on really hard here in Kentucky, and I think we've got a really good telemedicine bill. The one we passed back in 2018 was with the purpose of letting, as long as a provider is licensed in the state, they can be anywhere in the country. As long as they've got a license for Kentucky, they can practice. So, it prompted me to look it up. I just found stats for Kentucky's total psychiatrists, 350 active practicing psychiatrists in the state. That's about 8 psychiatrists per 100,000 residents. That's what we have as far as overall. And that's from a telepsychiatry kind of website. As to the Medicaid reimbursement, to give you an idea, when I was practicing in my own clinic, when we took in what we were receiving from Medicaid for a visit, what it cost us, we were making about $2 a visit. So you see 4 people in an hour, you're making $8 an hour. As a doctor, I could probably make more at Walmart right now. So as a doctor, let's say, and really with the liability that's added, if you make one wrong diagnosis, end of your practice, end of your career, potentially all those kinds of things. So it got to the point where it made it really tough. You would limit how many you would take. It was almost a public service to your community to take on those folks if you were willing to see them. But so many providers who are unwilling, and that's the reason why you start looking at their numbers, are taking a loss.
Right.
And that's we were really trim with our numbers and our finances, and that's a lot of the issues that we're seeing. I went on, I use Comp Care a lot in Clark County. Obviously, Pathways I know is in Montgomery. They're both in my district. But when we looked at Comp Care, and I was looking here at job postings, and the number of job postings, if you guys want to take a look, I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of, you look in Fayette County, you look at Floyd County, I think they've got, 30 positions that are open that they can't find people for, clearly, and providers. I'm just curious in terms of when you do get a psychiatrist locally, how long they stay for, and have you explored maybe getting a psychiatrist that's off-site? I mean, I know it's sometimes tougher, but if you get somebody who might be out of state with a Kentucky license now to say, hey, be the person that can provide our services, are you exploring those issues for psychiatrists as well?
We are exploring those issues. Just because the unique nature of the community mental health center, the prescriber doesn't have to do all of the heavy lifting. Like, there is liability there, but if you've got the community mental health center that's doing the day-to-day operations with that patient, then, the burden isn't on the prescriber always. So yes, we are looking at that option. Our only concern about that is, is continuity of care. We want to keep good continuity of care. Now, and what was the other question?
Just in terms of job openings. The other thing too, I mean, I forgot to mention one thing. When you're in the prison, seeing a lot of these folks, and you're saying, hey, they look like they've got schizophrenia. The question often becomes, do they have it prior to starting? I mean, are they self-medicating? They've got issues. They can't find somebody to see them for severe mental illness. They're taking their own drugs, trying to treat symptoms if they've got them. Those are real too. It's often what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Well, and they're young and at the age of onset. But I do a lot of presentations for the social work graduates at UK and at Morehead State, and I'm always saying, who in this graduating class is coming to mental health? Nobody. Who from these graduating classes are coming to Eastern Kentucky? Nobody. I mean, they're all ready to go to private care institutions that can pay more, have better benefits, and there's more of a culturally diverse area. So young people, they're not staying with us. If there was only an incentive because there's a huge shortage of licensed clinical social workers. Now, when I started, Medicaid was the primary payer for everybody, all of our SMI. Now, that's not true. We have more Medicare SMI people. Now, Medicare does not pay for targeted case management. They will not. But we have to provide it just the same, regardless of payer. So we always lose, but we have so many people that are Medicare. Now, the only licensure that's Medicare billable for outpatient services is a licensed clinical social worker. They can bill Medicare. not a master's of psychology, and only a prescriber can. So we have this 1 degree that is Medicare billable. And we have a shortage of everybody, but we have a huge shortage of licensed clinical social worker because they're so in demand in the urban areas and in other, positions that we cannot bring them this way. That's why we're offering a $10,000 sign-on bonus, in the hopes that we can get people back this way. So I'm not sure how to resolve that unless we do loan forgiveness for LCSWs to stay in the region and sign a contract.
And again, just I think every person that comes to present, we'd welcome. We can identify problems. We're good at that in healthcare. Sometimes saying, here's the issue, here's the problem. I got a problem here. We need to have some solutions that we can act on. And you all are living it every day. So anything that you can have as far as providing us recommended reductions of barriers to provide care or things that we can get done as a state would be welcome. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I was trying to phrase my question, Mark, because I can come from quite a few different angles, and I want to bridge off what Senator Alvarado was mentioning. It seems to me that part of the barriers are the boards themselves in terms of going through requirements. And for example, your profession, we needed somebody on our staff. But it's going to be a year before this person can come on because they're coming from Illinois. So I'm concerned on, and I like to see what we can do to change the dynamics, because I know PT and OT and I believe even the psychologists have a compact agreements.
Sure. We
can also go into reciprocal agreements, but I don't know if we want to go down the recognize process in doing that. Do you feel that there's a barrier or an issue or problem in terms of bringing people on that are out of state into the state to be licensed, so we can go around or cut some of the requirements from the board, providing things are done in a prudent manner to increase accessibility to the healthcare providers?
Well, sure. I mean, there's different requirements. Different social work boards in different states require different things. So you may qualify in one state to be billable, but not qualify in this state to be billable. So there's got to be a unifying of, that you can take that with you wherever you go. Take your licensure wherever you go.
Do you think there should be a federal law or something like that to do that, to have more of an interstate type of commerce?
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I have, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind asking, this General Assembly passed $300 million in terms of broadband accessibility to those underserved areas for 25 megs download and 3 upload and so forth. Part of that is going to get into those harder to reach areas. What's that going to do to like your organization? You have 3 shops, is that right? Three stores. Sorry, 3 locations, 3 centers.
Well, we have multiple centers across 10 counties.
Okay, 10 counties. Okay.
Yeah, we have like 2 offices per county.
Okay, I saw something around 3, but I'm probably looking at a very small area. Could you just explain how that's going to help you out, if at all, and if that's going to be enough to help y'all out in terms of getting that accessibility?
Well, it will help us reach the unreachable. Some of the folks that, like in Elliott County, like you can't even get a satellite signal. I mean, there's I have Sirius XM. I drive up that way and I can't even get a signal there at all. So any type of broadband, I mean, it's just impossible. So then the other thing is those folks don't have computers because they don't work. They've got landlines. So
Well, there is a program that they can get access like $50 in order to help with the payment on a monthly basis. Also, there's an acquisition program as well to help out to give those individuals those computers and that accessibility. There is a program out there to help do that, but it's not publicized, and a lot of people don't know about it.
Right.
And I get it.
Right. Yeah, we need to promote that because, you know, these are the same folks that are not going to get the COVID vaccine. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, like they're not coming to the health department to get information. They're not coming to the mental health center to get information. They're, you know, if they're involved with any part of us of any services, it's through social services because it's a kid issue. But you know, those folks, I mean, they live on a hilltop, and you know, if it's raining, they get a good TV signal that day. You know, I mean, that's.
I've invited Representative Fleming to come up and visit me.
Yeah, yeah, do that. Yeah, do that. That'd be great.
I could tell you a good story about that. Okay, Steve, you say you'll come back?
Yes. Can I say real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
In your
Thank
packet
you, Mark.
for me, thanks, Mark, is testimony that I provided in June of 2019 at the invitation of Chairman Alvarado, and that's about and includes an SMI waiver that Dr. Schuster talked about. That's a housing answer. It's in their packet. It's in there. 4 pages of my testimony from that. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of a plan, Kentucky's done the plan thing. 1966, we had a plan, okay? Emphasis should be placed on early referral and short-term intensive therapy, 1966. In-hospital benefits should be increased, and partial hospitalization day program should be included in in-hospital benefits. Talked about parity. Wasn't that language, but 1966. Increased recognition should be given to all professional skills essential to treatment. That's therapists, case managers. Insurance should not favor a particular type of treatment. Prescribed drugs should be covered for ambulatory, that was the language back there, as well as hospital patients. Okay? That was a pattern for change, 1966. That was done. June 21st, 2001. This is a template for change. There was a thing called the 843 Commission after House Bill 843 in the 2000 session. Right, Sheila? Sponsored by Representative Mary Lamargin and a variety of others. It came up with recommendations across the system. It talked about professional staffing in 2001. It talks about public funds consistent with quality standards. Make sure they're spent, Senator Meredith. 2001, that was talked about. It's talked about stigma, 2001. Transportation access, we heard that from Mr. Kelly, still a problem, 2001. Quality assurance, get the right outcomes. Housing, 2001, we talked about housing. Included, collaborate with Kentucky Housing Corporation, increase state funds for housing, increase direct state support and federal match money. That's a way to say Medicaid, okay? For housing options, including independent living, transitional housing, halfway houses, group homes, assisted living, supervised apartments, 2001. Had a piece on supported employment. We talked about then, people having a job and a good place to live. I contend that is not a particularly high standard for anyone in our country. And I concur with Senator Meredith. We are the richest country in the history of this planet, and we can't guarantee people who are severely mentally ill an opportunity to work and a decent, safe place to live. It's unacceptable. Talked about criminal justice. We've talked about this a lot. I'm getting too old, truthfully. We need to do something, and I'm so excited this exists. And I'll go into more detail, but just to the answer, we've had conversations. We've had a lot of discussions. I worked for a gentleman who was there when President Kennedy signed the legislation that created our system. He was there. He worked on it. He told me what it looks like. He told me we are a regional model, Representative Bentley. We are a regional model. We have an obligation to our communities. We have an obligation. Gentleman is Dan Howard. He passed away last fall. Quickly, Dan Howard. He was a unique individual because, and he was unique, President Kennedy handed him a pen. Adolph Rupp told him, don't pass behind your back. And Bear Bryant said, if you break your ankle again, the football team will have to keep it. Those are all true stories. Football, basketball, UK, and President Kennedy. No one else. That's all I got. I'll come back. I have more information. Waiver's the answer. I will bring the regional part back up. All good. It's a risk when you follow Dr. Schuster.
This has really been a great committee meeting. We don't have the passion after all that. Something's wrong. But before we adjourn, members, please note that remote access will be allowed for all meetings for the interim. Members will be provided the information prior to the meeting on how to access the meeting remotely, and the meeting materials will be made available online for downloading. The next scheduled meeting date available is July 20th at 3 p.m. Now, the next item is motion for adjournment. So